Okay, so this is the first of a three-part lecture on Hayek, on order and liberty. I want to start with a quotation. Now, this is a bad habit. Starting with quotes is usually pompous, but certainly don't do it with your essays. But I really like this quote. It nicely captures Hayek's insight into the relationship between order and liberty. Hayek says, "The argument for liberty is not an argument against organization, which is one of the most powerful means that human reason can employ, but an argument against all-exclusive, privileged, monopolistic organization, against the use of coercion to prevent others from trying to do better." So the question for Hayek is not whether there will be organization or whether there will be freedom. The question is, what kind of organization will we have? Who will do the organizing, and about what range of issues? In other words, will there be organization of all society from the top down following a single plan, from a single mind, or will there be many different plans, many organizing minds, with many plans and purposes? Traditionally, order and liberty are seen as a zero-sum equation. Quite literally, order plus liberty equals zero. More order means less liberty. More liberty means less order. This captures quite well what people usually mean when they think that if you let people do whatever they want, chaos is going to ensue. Liberty is good, these same people will tell you, but too much liberty, on the traditional view, leads to sacrificing important goods that people want: security, community, family ties, or virtue. Thomas Hobbes is very much an exponent of this sort of view. Hayek challenges this Hobbesian view of the relation between order and liberty. Under some circumstances, at least, freedom can produce order. They're not incompatible. It's not a zero-sum game. For example, Hayek sees very clearly from his field of study, which is economics, where he won a Nobel Prize in, I think, 1973, he sees that no one needs to organize trade for individuals to be able to make each other better off through trade. No one needs to organize trade for trade to be regular and predictable and obey predictable rules. In particular, the freedom to make decisions about where one will sell goods, labor, or services, and at what price, is the basic precondition for the regular order of the market. Not an impingement on order, but the very condition that makes that order possible. On the other hand, attempts to control the market order, like price controls or prohibitions from trading, are what brings chaos. It's what brings black market, gang activity, shortages, hoarding, waiting lines. These are the logical outgrowth of interferences with the market order, Hayek thinks, and they often introduce more unpredictability than there was before. Let me give you some examples. One of the miracles of the modern world is the supply chain. The supply chain is what enables retail businesses like Walmart or Best Buy to always seemingly have in stock the goods that you want. In fact, when they don't have the goods in stock that you want, it's a surprise. Most of us manage to go to our local grocery store or to Walmart without calling ahead to see if they have the goods that we desire in stock. We go and assume that they will in fact have the goods that we want at prices that we're willing to pay. And this is actually quite remarkable, because this happens without anybody telling Walmart that we're coming to the store, without telling Walmart that what to stock or what price to sell at. This all happens more or less spontaneously. The supply of labor is no different. When there are shortages of engineers and doctors, the starting salaries for these positions rise as hospitals and engineering firms realize that they don't have enough people to do the jobs they've been contracted to do. When salaries rise, more people decide to go to medical school or engineering school rather than other professions like law school or business school. Again, these are all professions that smart people go to, but smart people have to make choices as to what to do in life, and part of how they're going to make that choice is based on how much money they're going to be able to make throughout their careers. There's no real need for anyone to tell individuals that they should go to medical school if there's a shortage of doctors. The price mechanism will ensure that people respond rationally, more or less, to incentives based on their own preferences. Of course, somebody who really doesn't like bodily fluids and blood is going to have to see a very, very large salary to compensate for the inconvenience of going to medical school and dealing with these things. But I suspect that if the price is high enough, or the wages are high enough, that even a person who's squeamish about those sorts of things would be willing to forego a more sedate profession like business or law. Similarly, when starting salaries fall, reflecting a decrease in demand or an oversupply of qualified candidates, people navigate naturally to other occupations. So, the lesson here is that supply meets demand most of the time without the need for a central authority to direct traffic. Freedom and order, if we define order as regularity and predictability of behavior, are far from incompatible. Order emerges through the interactions of millions of people without anybody doing any designing. Indeed, Hayek goes a step further. He says it's really hard to imagine any order of any complexity as being designed from on high. Right? No order of any complexity can really exist as a designed order. The reason for this is that designed orders are limited by the organizing power of whoever's doing the designing. For that reason, it tends to only be able to serve a limited number of purposes and be able to gather a limited amount of information in order to make decisions. The opposite is true for spontaneous orders. Spontaneous orders like the market are regulated by the price mechanisms. And the price mechanism embodies information that almost nobody knows, but at the same time perfectly, or not perfectly necessarily, but at least regularly coordinates people's behavior. You know that when the price of something goes up, you have to economize on its use. So for instance, if the price of bread goes up, you're probably going to consume a little bit less bread to meet your budget. And so the demand for bread is going to go down when the price goes up. But you don't need to know why the price of bread went up. You don't need to know whether millers went on strike, or whether a wheat crop failed somewhere, or whether truckers that transport the bread to the market went on strike. All you need to know in order to orient your behavior and consume less bread is that the price went up. And this is true for all commodities. The price mechanism coordinates our behavior without the need for any of us to really know what's going on and why. So the market can respond to the tastes and preferences of millions of consumers and workers, coordinated only by the information contained in freely moving prices, which themselves reflect demand and supply conditions. In other words, the market can serve many purposes because it does not rely on the capacities of a single mind to organize it, and that makes it able to be infinitely more complex than the designed order of even a single firm or the military. This insight of Hayek's about the limitations of designed orders is sometimes called the knowledge problem. Now, the knowledge problem is this insight that suggests that designed orders can only take advantage of a very limited amount of information, whereas spontaneous orders can potentially make use of the information of millions of people all over the world, behaving in rational and self-interested sorts of ways. These designed orders he calls taxis, and the spontaneous orders, like the market, he calls cosmos. Now, these insights are not just applicable to the domain of market economics. Far from it. Otherwise, this lecture would only be appropriate in an economics course. First of all, it's a metaphor borrowed from biology. It's borrowed from biology because biologists have long observed organisms and ecosystems self-regulated. That is to say that without anybody needing to design the system equilibrates and adjusts. Cells divide without any planner telling the cell when to divide, how to divide, and what ultimately the purpose is. In language, linguists use spontaneous orders to better explain the evolution of languages into more or less stable, but also ever-evolving systems of symbols and meanings. No one designed the English language. That's important to know. The English language evolves to suit our purposes, and our purposes in this case is communication. We have to be able to communicate clearly. And so our language evolves to take advantage of new words when we need new words for things, new concepts when we need to express new ideas, and so on and so forth. Comparing a real language like English to a design language like Esperanto or a computer programming language tells us that the design language is often incredibly impoverished, and because it can only ultimately respond to the design of an individual mind. Okay. The insights of the knowledge problem can also be applied to communities and cities. Communities and cities are often complex equilibria, but no urban planner can quite reproduce. The work of Jane Jacobs on the life and death of American cities is particularly interesting, as is Jim Scott's Seeing Like a State. And finally, in the study of civil engineering, traffic systems and crowds often contain elements of spontaneous order. They exhibit, again, predictable regularities despite a lack of central coordination, and that's the essence of the spontaneous order. If they didn't, then when we were walking in crowds, we'd be running into each other all the time. But it turns out that because we observe various rules about personal space, and who gets to go first and when, and so on and so forth, people don't run into each other as much as you might think. Okay. So, to understand where Hayek is coming from with all of this, and why he thinks this insight into the two different kinds of order is important, I need to detour a little bit into the history of social and political thought. And so that will be the topic of the next lecture.